My boyfriend told me his ex was moving in. There was no discussion. I answered, neither is my departure. Then I loaded my life into a truck, took my name off the lease, and stepped aside while his ex-girlfriend, the landlord, and real life taught him exactly what non-negotiable actually looks like. My name is Elena Parker. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a logistics coordinator for a regional distribution company. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady, predictable. Systems, schedules, spreadsheets. I like knowing where things are supposed to go and when they're supposed to arrive. I track my expenses. I pay my bills early. I don't like surprises, especially the kind that show up in the middle of my living room. Chaos has a way of creeping into life when you live with someone who thrives on it. My boyfriend, Marcus Reed, was the opposite of me in almost every way. Marcus worked in event marketing. Loud environments, big personalities, constant last-minute changes. He was charismatic, confident, and extremely comfortable making decisions quickly. When we first started dating 2 years earlier, I thought that confidence was attractive. Marcus walked into rooms like he belonged there. People listened to him. He had that easy social charm that makes strangers laugh within minutes. At the beginning, I told myself our personalities balanced each other out. Over time, I realized something else. Marcus didn't just make decisions quickly. He made them alone. Then he told people what had already been decided. We'd been living together for about 14 months in a downtown apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was a good building. Clean hallways, quiet neighbors, solid management. Rent wasn't cheap, but we split everything evenly. At least that was the agreement. Marcus had a strong personality. That's the polite way to say it. The less polite way would be, he was used to getting his way. Early in the relationship, I chalked that up to ambition, drive, leadership. But over time, I noticed the thing underneath it, control. There was one detail that never fully disappeared from our relationship. Claire, Marcus's ex-girlfriend. They dated for 3 years before he met me. According to Marcus, Claire was emotionally complicated and always going through something. The way he described it, their relationship had ended because she was too intense, too unstable, too dramatic. But her name came up often enough that it never really faded into the background. Usually, it was framed as a kind of comparison. She used to do this. She would have reacted differently. She's still struggling. At first, I didn't think much about it. Everyone has a past. Then, about a month before everything exploded, Claire started appearing in conversations more often. Marcus mentioned she was having a rough time. Apparently, her roommate had moved out suddenly. Then the story shifted. Actually, the roommate had kicked her out. Then it shifted again. Now Claire was staying on a friend's couch while trying to figure things out. I remember nodding and saying something neutral like, "That's rough." But internally, I filed it away the way I do with delayed shipments at work. Not urgent, just information, until the night it became urgent. It was a Tuesday evening. I got home from work a little after 6. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of Marcus's laptop on the kitchen counter. He was sitting there scrolling through something, elbows on the surface, jaw tight in the way it gets. When he's rehearsing a conversation, he's already decided how to finish. I recognized the look immediately. Marcus had already made up his mind about something. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the chair. He didn't answer right away. He closed the laptop slowly and turned toward me. "We need to talk." I leaned against the counter across from him. Whenever someone says that sentence, your brain immediately starts running through worst-case scenarios. Job loss, financial trouble, family emergency, something real. Instead, Marcus folded his hands together and said casually, "Claire's moving in." I blinked. For about 2 seconds, I genuinely thought he was joking. "Funny," I said. Marcus didn't laugh. "She's having a rough time right now," he continued. "Her roommate's situation collapsed. She needs somewhere temporary to land." My brain took another second to process what he'd actually said. "Okay," I said slowly. "And?" "She'll take the spare room." That's when I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so absurd, I assumed I'd misunderstood. Marcus didn't laugh. "Wait," I said. "You're serious?" He nodded once. "It's temporary." "When did this get decided?" "Today." "And you didn't think to mention it before now?" Marcus rolled his eyes immediately. "Because you'd make it dramatic." That sentence hung in the air between us like something sour. I stared at him for a second longer than usual. That's when the quiet realization settled in. This wasn't a discussion. Marcus wasn't asking. He was informing me. "I live here too," I said. "And?" "And decisions about our apartment involve both of us." He leaned back in the chair, already irritated. "Elena, she's in crisis. Helping someone for a few weeks isn't that big of a deal. You're mature enough to understand that." The tone in his voice said something else entirely. "Be reasonable." Translation. Be compliant. I watched him for another moment. Then I asked one simple question. When is she moving in? Friday. It was Tuesday. Marcus must have seen the math running through my head because he added quickly, "It's just temporary." I nodded once. Then I said calmly, "If she's moving in and there's no discussion, then neither is my departure." Marcus smirked. Actually smirked. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being consistent." He waved his hand dismissively. "Elena, relax. Claire's taking the spare room for a couple weeks. It's not like she's moving into our bedroom." I didn't answer. Instead, I looked around the apartment. The couch I bought. The dining table. The television. Half the kitchen equipment. My desk in the spare room. Funny how quickly a place stops feeling like home when someone tells you your opinion doesn't count inside it. Marcus had already turned back toward his laptop. Conversation finished. Decision made. He thought the situation was settled. He thought I would argue, or negotiate, or eventually accept it. What he didn't realize was that I had already reached the same conclusion he had. There really wasn't a discussion anymore, just a timeline. And mine had already started. The next morning, Marcus acted like nothing had happened. That told me everything. He assumed the conversation from the night before had been one of those relationship arguments that fades by morning. Something emotional, something temporary. But I hadn't been emotional. I'd been decisive. Marcus was already halfway through his coffee when I walked into the kitchen. He was scrolling through his phone, occasionally typing with that focused expression he gets when he's juggling multiple conversations. Probably work, or Claire. "Morning," he said casually, like the previous night hadn't included the announcement that his ex-girlfriend would soon be sleeping 10 feet away from me. "Morning," I replied. I poured coffee and leaned against the counter, studying him quietly. Marcus didn't notice the difference. People rarely do when they think they've already won. After a minute, he said, "Claire's probably bringing a few bags Friday. Nothing crazy." I nodded once. Good. A timeline. He interpreted the silence as acceptance. What he didn't know was that while he was describing Claire's luggage situation, I was mentally rearranging my entire living situation. By the time I got to work that morning, the decision had already solidified in my head. I opened my laptop, finished 2 urgent logistics reports, and then stepped outside for a phone call. I dialed the leasing office. "Good morning, Riverside Management," the receptionist answered. "Hi," I said. "I had a question about a joint lease." A short pause. "What would you like to know?" "I'm one of the tenants in Unit 412, I explained. "If someone needed to remove themselves from a lease before the term ends, what's the process?" The answer came quickly. "Well, both tenants would have to sign a release," she said, "and the remaining tenant would need to qualify on their own or with a replacement cosigner." "Interesting. And if someone moved in who wasn't on the lease?" "That would require approval," she said immediately. "Unauthorized occupants violate the lease agreement." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my car for a moment, letting the information settle. Marcus had told Claire she could move in. Marcus had assumed everything would work itself out. Marcus had also forgotten one very important detail. My name was on that lease too, and contracts don't care about assumptions. That afternoon, I made 2 more calls. The first was to a moving truck rental company. "Thursday evening?" the clerk asked. "Yes," I said, "pick up at 6. The reservation was non-refundable. "Good. Commitment helps prevent hesitation." The second call was to my friend Jason. Jason and I had known each other since college. We weren't especially close day to day, but he was the kind of person who answered the phone when someone needed help. "Hey," he said when he picked up. "What's up?" "Random question," I said. "Do you still have that spare bedroom?" "Yeah," he replied slowly. "Why?" "I might need somewhere to crash for a couple weeks." Jason didn't even hesitate. "Of course, what happened?" "I'll explain later," I said, "but I appreciate it." "No problem." That was it. One conversation. One safety net. Sometimes that's all you need to make a decision permanent. By Wednesday evening, the spare room in the apartment looked very different. It had always been neutral space before. My desk, my bookshelf, some storage boxes. Now it looked like a small warehouse. Cardboard boxes stacked along the wall. Clothes folded into plastic bins. Cables coiled neatly into labeled bags. Marcus walked in while I was taping the top of another box shut. He stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Packing," I said. He leaned against the frame, watching me for a moment, like he was trying to decode a strange performance. "You're really doing this?" "I told you I would." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You're leaving over this?" I set the tape dispenser down and looked at him. "No," I said calmly. "I'm leaving because you told me I don't get a say in where I live." "That's not what I said." "You said there was no discussion." "That's because you'd make it dramatic." "I didn't." Marcus crossed his arms. "You're being insecure about Claire." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not going to be homeless and insecure at the same time." That earned a frustrated sigh. "Elena, it's temporary." "Temporary doesn't mean optional for me." He ran a hand through his hair. So what? You're punishing me for helping someone? I shrugged slightly. You're free to help whoever you want. Then I picked up another box. I'm just choosing not to live there when you do. Marcus stood there another few seconds, clearly expecting the conversation to escalate. It didn't. Eventually, he walked away, muttering something about me being dramatic. That night, he ordered takeout and watched television like nothing unusual was happening. But every time he passed the spare room, the stack of boxes grew taller. And even though he kept pretending the situation was manageable, I could see the confusion slowly creeping into his expression. Thursday afternoon arrived faster than expected. Marcus was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone when I walked into the living room with another sealed box. He glanced up. You're still on this? Yes. Elena, relax, he said. Claire's not even here yet. That's correct. So why are you acting like the apartment is already overrun? I set the box near the door. I'm not. Marcus rolled his eyes. You're blowing this out of proportion. I didn't respond. Because explaining boundaries to someone who already dismissed them rarely works. Instead, I checked the time. 5:52 p.m. 8 minutes later, headlights flashed through the living room window. A large white truck rolled to a stop in front of the building. Marcus walked to the window. Then he froze. You actually rented a truck? Yes. For what? I picked up the first box. To move my life. His expression shifted from irritation to disbelief. Elena, stop. I didn't stop. I carried the box out the door, down the stairs, into the back of the truck. The driver handed me the keys and a clipboard for the signature. By the time I carried the second box downstairs, Marcus had followed me outside. You're embarrassing me, he said. That was the first honest sentence he'd spoken all week. Not you're hurting me. Not I don't want you to go. Embarrassing. Because somewhere out there, Claire probably believed everything was fine. Marcus had likely already told her that I was completely supportive of this arrangement. And now a moving truck was parked in front of the building, proving otherwise. By the third trip downstairs, Marcus had started pacing. Elena, she doesn't have anywhere else to go. I'm not stopping you from helping her. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I loaded another box into the truck. No, I said calmly. I'm removing myself from a situation I didn't agree to. Marcus exhaled sharply. You're overreacting. Maybe. Then I looked at him. But the lease still has 2 names on it. He paused. If Claire moves in, I continued, that technically requires landlord approval. Marcus's expression flickered. Just for a second. Relax, he said quickly. The landlord loves me. Maybe. I didn't threaten anything. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stated facts. By 9 p.m., half the apartment was empty. The couch, the television, the dining table, the bed frame, the kitchen appliances. All mine, all gone. The living room suddenly looked twice as large and strangely hollow. Marcus stood in the middle of the empty space. So what? He said finally. You're just abandoning me? I grabbed my keys. No. I met his eyes calmly. I'm stepping aside. He hated that phrasing. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. Because stepping aside meant something very different than losing an argument. It meant the argument was already finished. When I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed once. A message from Marcus. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. Because there was one thing Marcus hadn't fully thought through yet. Removing my name from the lease wasn't optional for him. And Claire was scheduled to arrive in less than 24 hours. Friday morning started with my phone vibrating against the nightstand beside Jason's couch. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. Marcus. Again. And again. When I finally opened my eyes, the screen showed 12 missed calls. All from him. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Instead, I got up, made coffee in Jason's tiny kitchen, and stepped onto the balcony with my phone. There was one call I actually needed to make. The leasing office. The property manager answered this time, a woman named Linda, who I'd spoken to once before when we renewed the lease. Riverside Management, Linda speaking. Hi, Linda. This is Elena Parker from Unit 412. Yes, Elena. How can I help you? I wanted to formally notify you that I've vacated the apartment and would like to begin the process of removing myself from the lease. There was a brief pause as she pulled up the account. I see your name here with Marcus Reed, she said. That's correct. And you've fully moved out? Yes. Another pause while she typed. All right, she said. We can begin the tenant release process. Both parties will need to sign documentation, and Mr. Reed will need to qualify independently or add another approved occupant. That last part hung quietly in the air. Hypothetically, I asked, keeping my voice neutral, what happens if an additional person moves in without written approval? Linda didn't hesitate. That would be considered a lease violation. Immediate? Yes, she said. We issue a compliance notice. I thanked her, hung up, and took a slow sip of coffee. Paperwork doesn't care about intentions. It cares about signatures. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Not a call this time. A text from Marcus. Claire's here. We need to talk about the lease. I didn't respond. A second message appeared. The landlord says we both have to sign something. Still nothing from me. Then the tone shifted. Why would you call them without telling me? I stared at the message for a moment. So he knew. Marcus finally understood that when I said I was leaving, I meant legally, not just physically. I set the phone down and finished my coffee. An hour later, I sent a single response. Clean. Simple. I'm removing myself from the lease. I won't be financially responsible for a third occupant I didn't agree to. I'll sign the release once you qualify solo or add her legally. Then I blocked him. Phone. Social media. Everything. Not because I was angry. Because clarity is easier without noise. About 40 minutes later, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I declined it. 2 minutes later, another unknown number. Declined. Claire. It had to be. Marcus had probably handed her his phone like this was some kind of group project. But I wasn't interested in a three-way debate about an apartment I no longer lived in. By that afternoon, the situation had already begun spreading through our mutual friend group. Not intentionally, just naturally. People talk. Jason walked into the living room holding his phone. You and Marcus good? He asked carefully. I raised an eyebrow. That depends on your definition of good. He sat down across from me. Word is, Claire's moved into your apartment. His apartment now, I corrected. Jason nodded slowly. And the landlord's involved? Potentially. He whistled under his breath. That's going to get messy. Not for me. Jason tilted his head. You're that sure? Yes. Because the truth was simple. I didn't need Marcus to lose. I just needed to not be attached to the situation anymore. Saturday morning brought more updates. Not from Marcus. From friends. Apparently, Claire had assumed she was just staying for a couple weeks. A mattress in the spare room. 2 duffel bags. Fresh start energy. Instead, she had walked into something else entirely. An email from the building. Occupancy compliance notice. The landlord had requested updated documentation within 72 hours. Failure to comply would trigger a lease review. Corporate language for, you're on thin ice. Marcus tried spinning the situation at first. According to one friend, he told Claire I had overreacted and made things complicated out of spite. He framed it like paperwork. Just paperwork. But paperwork has numbers attached to it. Income verification. Credit checks. Lease obligations. Claire apparently hadn't planned on any of that. She thought she was crashing. Instead, she was being asked to legally join a year-long financial contract. And that's when their first argument happened. It didn't take long. Crisis bonding works great in theory. It feels heroic. Rescuing someone. Starting over. But reality shows up fast when someone hands you forms that say financial responsibility in bold letters. Midweek, I received an email from the property manager. Not forwarded from Marcus. Directly from the building. Subject line, tenant release documentation. Inside the email was a digital form confirming that Marcus had submitted paperwork to remove me from the lease and retain the unit with an additional applicant pending approval. Translation. He needed me fully gone to stabilize his situation. I opened the document, signed it, sent it back. No message, no commentary. Apparently that shocked him more than anything else. One of our mutual friends told me later that Marcus had expected me to stall, to hold the signature hostage as leverage. Instead, I stepped aside exactly like I said I would. But that created a new problem Marcus hadn't predicted. The security deposit. Half of it legally belonged to me. And when tenants change mid-lease, landlords don't automatically redistribute deposits, which meant Marcus had to pay my half back if he wanted to keep the unit intact. According to the grapevine, Claire did not volunteer to cover it. That led to another argument, a louder one. Funny how quickly non-negotiable decisions start requiring negotiation when money appears. Meanwhile, my life had become quiet. Jason's spare bedroom wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. No tension, no raised voices, no unexpected roommates arriving. A week later, I signed a lease for a small studio across town. 6 months. Clean slate. The building was older, but quiet. Mostly professionals who kept to themselves. The first night I slept there, the silence felt unfamiliar. No footsteps. No conversations drifting through the hallway. Just calm. Back at the old apartment, things weren't so calm. Marcus and Claire had officially started living together, but the dynamic had already shifted. Because for the first time since Tuesday night, Marcus wasn't the one controlling the situation anymore. He was reacting, and he was doing it without me in the room. By the second week after I moved out, the tone of the updates I heard through mutual friends started to change. At first, everything sounded manageable. Marcus had submitted the paperwork to add Claire to the lease. The landlord reviewed her application and approved it after a few days. But it wasn't a clean approval. It came with conditions. Higher security deposit, stricter lease addendum, automatic payment enrollment. Zero tolerance for late rent. It was the building's way of saying, "We're watching you now." Apparently, Marcus had pushed hard to make it happen. He didn't want to lose the apartment. And Claire didn't have many other options, so they signed. On paper, the situation stabilized. In reality, it had just begun applying pressure. The first crack appeared when the security deposit transfer came up. Because once my name came off the lease, Marcus had to return my half. The landlord didn't split deposits when tenants changed midterm. It was the remaining tenant's responsibility to settle it privately, which meant Marcus owed me several $1,000s. To his credit, he paid it. Transferred the money within a week. No message attached. Just the transaction. That part was clean. But the financial strain didn't disappear. It simply moved inside the apartment. From what I heard, Claire had originally framed her situation as temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month, enough time to stabilize things. But when the lease paperwork came through, it changed the entire equation. Because once she was legally added, it wasn't just couch surfing anymore. It was responsibility. Rent, utilities, application fees, credit checks. Suddenly, temporary had turned into commitment. And Claire hadn't fully anticipated that. The first rent cycle arrived sooner than expected. Marcus had always handled rent with me the same way every month. Predictable. Automatic transfers. Clean math. But Claire's situation was less structured. Freelance design work. Invoices pending. Clients who paid soon. At first, Marcus seemed willing to be flexible. But flexibility doesn't pay rent. The payment deadline came and went. 2 days late. Under the stricter lease addendum, that triggered an automatic notice. Nothing catastrophic. Just a formal warning. But warnings change the atmosphere inside an apartment. Suddenly, every bill feels heavier. Every conversation carries more edge. According to one friend who still talked regularly with Marcus, their arguments started small. Money, groceries, utilities. Then they got more specific. Why is the electric bill higher? Why are you ordering takeout again? Didn't you say that client paid you already? That's the thing about shared financial pressure. It exposes dynamics quickly. Claire had originally been the person Marcus was helping. But over time, that narrative shifted. Helping someone in crisis feels empowering. Helping someone indefinitely starts feeling like obligation. Meanwhile, the building itself wasn't helping. About 3 weeks after I moved out, I got a call I hadn't expected. The landlord. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello? Hi, Elena, Linda said professionally. I just wanted to confirm something quickly. Yes? You fully vacated Unit 412 and removed all belongings, correct? Yes. Perfect. We've had a few noise complaints recently and wanted to make sure you were no longer an occupant. Noise complaints. Interesting. Apparently, Claire had started hosting small gatherings. Late night music. Friends on the balcony. People smoking where the building technically didn't allow it. The kind of activity that attracts attention in a building full of professionals who go to bed before midnight. The irony wasn't lost on me. When Marcus and I lived there, he used to complain about the upstairs neighbors walking too loudly after 10. Now his apartment was the one getting written warnings. The second rent cycle didn't go smoothly either. This time the payment was late again. Another notice. More documentation. More pressure. From what I heard, Marcus was furious. Not just about the late fees, about the pattern. Claire, on the other hand, thought the landlord was being unreasonable. She complained the building was corporate and inflexible. Marcus's response was simple. It's a contract. Funny how perspectives shift when you're the one responsible for the numbers. Meanwhile, my life had become stable. My studio apartment was small but quiet. The building mostly housed professionals who liked predictable schedules and minimal drama. I worked, came home, cooked dinner, watched a show, slept. Peaceful. One evening, about 9 weeks after I moved out, I was walking downtown after grabbing takeout when I heard someone say my name. Elena. I turned. Marcus. We both stopped at the edge of the sidewalk. For a second, neither of us spoke. He looked different, not worse. Just tired, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. So, he said finally, are you happy now? That question told me everything. Not how are you? Not I miss you. Happy now. As if this entire situation had been some kind of revenge strategy. I wasn't trying to win anything, I said calmly. Marcus gave a short laugh. Sure. I just didn't want to live in a situation I didn't agree to. He looked away toward the street. Claire and I are working through things. Working through. Interesting phrasing. As if this was a project, a phase, something temporary. I nodded. That's good. He seemed almost disappointed by the lack of argument. Then he said, you could have given me more time. For what? To figure it out. I considered that for a second. Then I shook my head slightly. You already had. Marcus frowned. What's that supposed to mean? You said there was no discussion. He didn't answer. Because once someone says that sentence in a shared living situation, the outcome is already determined. The only question left is who adjusts. Marcus had assumed it would be me. Instead, I removed myself from the equation. A few weeks later, the situation finally collapsed. Rent went 5 days late. That triggered a formal lease review. The landlord gave Marcus 2 options. Bring the account current immediately and commit to 0 further violations, or begin voluntary termination. Voluntary termination sounds polite. It isn't. It means you leave before the situation becomes legally ugly. The meeting with the landlord happened on a Tuesday morning. Marcus went in expecting a conversation. What he got instead was a spreadsheet, 2 late rent payments, noise complaints, written warnings, and the clause in the addendum he and Claire had signed. 5 days late on rent had triggered a compliance review. Marcus apparently sat there in silence while the property manager explained the options. 48 hours. That was the window. 2 days to stabilize everything. Or prepare to leave. The problem was that Marcus and Claire were no longer aligned. Not even close. By the time that meeting happened, the apartment had already turned into something neither of them expected. A pressure cooker. Claire had originally arrived thinking she was getting a soft landing. A few weeks, a place to regroup. But once the paperwork started stacking up, the atmosphere changed. Bills, deadlines, late fees, Marcus asking questions about money. According to a friend who'd heard the argument through thin apartment walls during one visit, the fight started quietly. Then it escalated fast. You said this would be temporary, Claire told him. It was supposed to be, Marcus snapped back. So why did you put me on the lease? Because Elena called the landlord. And that's my fault? Marcus rubbed his face like he was trying to push the stress away. You could have helped more with the rent. Claire laughed sharply. With what money? With the freelance work you keep talking about. It's not like clients pay instantly. Then maybe you shouldn't have promised you could cover half. That was the moment the argument stopped being about the apartment. It became about expectations. Marcus had imagined rescuing someone temporarily. Claire had imagined staying without obligations. Reality delivered something else. Responsibility. The breakup happened quietly. No dramatic explosion. Just a slow unraveling. Claire packed her bags first. 2 duffel bags again. The same amount she'd arrived with. Except this time there was no optimism about fresh starts. She left on a Sunday afternoon. By Monday morning, she was back to couch surfing. Marcus tried holding the apartment together alone, but the numbers didn't work. Not anymore. The landlord gave him one final option. Voluntary termination. Marcus signed. The apartment that had started the entire chain of events was gone. I didn't hear the final details directly, just fragments through friends. Claire had disappeared from Marcus's life again. The apartment was relisted within weeks. New tenants. Clean slate. Meanwhile, my own life had quietly shifted in a different direction. About a month after moving into the studio, I met someone. Not through a dating app. Not through friends. Just normal life. His name was Adrian. 31. He worked in healthcare administration. We met because he moved into the unit across the hall from mine. The first conversation happened because of a misdelivered package. He knocked on my door holding a small box. Hey, he said, I think this belongs to you. The second conversation happened 3 days later when we ran into each other by the coffee machine in the lobby. The third happened naturally. Dinner, then a walk, then another dinner. What stood out immediately wasn't some dramatic spark. It was something simpler. The tone. There was no power struggle in our conversations. No testing boundaries. Just 2 adults talking. One evening, about 3 weeks into seeing each other casually, Adrian asked, while we were cooking dinner in his apartment, So what happened in your last relationship? I considered the answer for a moment. Then I told the truth. My ex made a major living decision without discussing it with me, I said. So I removed myself from the situation. Adrian nodded. That makes sense. That was it. No eye roll. No suggestion that I had overreacted. Just acceptance. And that simple reaction felt stranger than anything else. Because suddenly I realized how tense I had been before. How often I'd been bracing for pushback. One night while we were washing dishes after dinner, Adrian mentioned something casually. My ex reached out last week, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? Yeah, asked if I wanted to grab coffee. And? He shrugged. I said no. Why? Because it wouldn't feel respectful to where I am now. The answer was so matter-of-fact that it took me a second to respond. No speech about maturity. No claim about being evolved enough to handle complicated dynamics. Just boundaries. Simple. Clear. Respectful. Around the same time, I heard the final update about Marcus. He had moved out of the old building. Claire was long gone. And the apartment that once felt non-negotiable was back on the market, waiting for someone else to sign the paperwork. 6 months after I loaded my life into that moving truck, everything had settled into something calmer. Not perfect, just stable. Adrian and I never rushed anything. No dramatic declarations. Just a steady rhythm that built itself naturally over time. Weekends together. Shared groceries. Quiet evenings cooking. Occasional debates about movies that ended with both of us laughing. When my 6-month studio lease started approaching renewal, Adrian asked a question while we were sitting at his kitchen table with takeout containers between us. "So," he said casually, "what are you thinking about the lease?" That was it. No assumption, no declaration, just a question. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. "Honestly," I said, "I'm still deciding." He nodded. "Fair." We ate for a few minutes before he added, "I've been considering moving somewhere bigger eventually. My place is fine, but it's a little tight." Then he paused. If we ever decided to do that together, we'd obviously talk through everything first. There was a small emphasis on the word talk. Not heavy, just intentional. I smiled. That sounds like a healthy process. He laughed. Radical concept, right? It might sound simple, but that conversation ended up being one of the most important moments of the relationship, because we actually discussed it. Budget, location, commutes, privacy, expectations, who pays what, how decisions get made. Every detail Marcus once waved away as unnecessary. By the end of the conversation, we had a plan, not a declaration. A plan. 3 weeks later, we signed a lease together. New building, neutral ground, both names on the paperwork, clear financial terms, simple logistics. Meanwhile, Marcus's situation wrapped itself up the way situations like that usually do, slowly and a little messily. From what I heard through mutual friends, he moved twice in 3 months. First into a friend's spare bedroom, then into a smaller apartment further outside downtown. Claire resurfaced briefly during that time, but the pattern repeated itself. Once conversations turned toward money or responsibility, she disappeared again. Some people bond easily over chaos. They just struggle to stay once stability requires effort. The original apartment Marcus and I shared was rented again within weeks of the voluntary termination. New tenants, new furniture, new life inside the same walls. To them, it was just another downtown unit. They would never know how much history had unfolded there. About 4 months after everything ended, I received a message request on LinkedIn from Marcus. The message was short. "I miscalculated. I thought you'd stay." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just acknowledgement. I stared at the message for a moment. Then I closed the app. Not out of bitterness. Just clarity. Because that had always been the core of the entire situation. Marcus didn't think I'd leave. He thought I would argue, adjust, compromise, eventually tolerate the decision he'd already made. He thought non-negotiable only flowed one direction. But the moment he said there was no discussion, he removed the one thing that actually makes cohabitation work. Agreement. I didn't fight his decision. I matched it. He said his ex-girlfriend was moving in. I said neither was my departure. And that was that. Looking back now, the funny part is that non-negotiable decisions are rarely loud. They're quiet. They look like paperwork signed without hesitation. Keys returned without speeches. A moving truck loading boxes while someone watches from a window thinking, "You're bluffing." I wasn't bluffing. The only thing that turned out to be truly non-negotiable was reality itself. Rent is due. Leases get enforced. People either qualify or they don't. And when someone tells you there's no discussion in a shared life, the discussion is already over. You just have to decide whether you're staying for it. I didn't. And now my home doesn't come with surprise roommates or unilateral decisions. Just doors that open when two people agree to turn the handle.